order. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As required by Section 84-1412, subsection 8 of the Nebraska statutes, notice is hereby given that a copy of the Opens Meeting Act is posted for your examination on the wall inside the door to the City Council chambers. Before we have roll call, I'd like to welcome all of our guests tonight. We have a nice full chambers. Like to have you stick around for the whole meeting if you can. If not, we appreciate your attending whatever part you can. So could we have a roll call, please?
George Klein.
Here.
Shane Shepard.
Here.
Mark Graves.
Here.
Kevin Alexi.
Here.
Clay Anderson.
Here.
Could we have a motion for approval of the agenda, please?
I'll make a motion to approve of the agenda.
I'll second.
Motion by Shane, second by Kevin. Approve the agenda. Could we have roll call, please?
Alexi.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Shepard.
Yes.
Graves.
Yes.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Motion by Mark, seconded by Clay to approve the consent agenda. It consists of minutes of the City Council meeting of May 5th. The minutes from the Business Improvement District that was held March 24th of this year. Monthly Treasurer's Report for April of this year. Monthly Water Report for April. Fire Department membership update. They're at their meeting. There are 45 active members. The special designated licenses that were administratively approved to the Ridge for a wedding reception at the Dawes County Fairgrounds on May 24th. And the Ridge, the Favorite Bar, Fridays, 120 Bar and Grill, Wild's Bar and Grill, and Bean Broker Coffee House and Pub, and out for outdoor live music during Fur Trade Days on July 11th through the 12th, 2025. Could we have roll call, please?
Alexi.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Shepard.
Yes.
Graves.
Yes.
I hope no one had any comments or questions about those consent agenda. I kind of skipped over that fast. I was in such a hurry to get to our next item, which is to recognize Cheryl Chambers for her years of service with the city of Chadron. Do we have Julie is going to make a presentation and little introduction and
This is my last chance to beat me up. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. All right, I just have a little, can I say a little, oh, you want to go first?
go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So, good evening, council members and mayor. Tonight is a sad but happy moment for all of us in recognizing Cheryl's retirement of 45 years working for Chadron City Transit, also known as Handy Bus, as she knows it. Cheryl is the icon of transit. She was hired at the age of 32 by Chief Fastine. Back then, there was no application process required, just a blessing from the chief. Chief Fastine is here tonight to fire Cheryl, which is only appropriate to bring closure to her tenure with the city of Chadron. When I started in 22, my first day, I rode with Cheryl to see what I was getting into. I witnessed Cheryl pick up and deliver riders like it was nothing. At that time, the PD dispatched the calls via police radio. Cheryl would write down the names, address, and destination, which was nothing for Cheryl as she knew everyone in the routine. I told Cheryl we're going to computerize dispatch, so no more writing down. Cheryl was not happy, and after a few choice words, Cheryl said she was going to quit. As you can witness here, Cheryl didn't quit, and she mastered the computer in 2 hours. Throughout her years, Cheryl trained numerous drivers as they came and left. Driving is not what one thinks. Today, the transit team is here to say thank you, and we wish Cheryl good luck. We'll truly miss you, and we love you. That's from each one of the drivers. Thank you. To you. So I'm going to get out of your spotlight.
Appreciate all your years of experience. You gotta give me a handshake and a hug. Now, Ted wants to say an additional word.
No, she didn't bring the card. But I think Cheryl is the longest serving driver we had, and she's done an excellent job. And I hate to fire her tonight. She wants me to fire her tonight. Actually, when she was working, I never could find her doing anything wrong. She does complain.
One day he said, I knew how far I could go with you. And when his face would get as red as your jacket, and he'd slam his hand down on his desk and he'd say, God damn it, Cheryl, will you listen? I'm the boss.
Well, I don't remember that. Congratulations, you've done a great job for the city. You serve a lot of citizens. Okay?
I too would like to thank you, Cheryl, for your service. 45 years is a long time.
Okay. Back to more mundane things. Our business, Deb Cottier from NNDC.
Good evening, Council. Deb Cottier, 428 North Chadron Avenue. You received a report from me, it should have been in your packet with some information. Just a couple things, I guess maybe I would highlight. The Panhandle Area Development District is kind of doing double duty here. They work for each of the members that belong to the development district on a variety of municipal projects and a lot of infrastructure things. They've been involved in some housing projects in the past, but they've been asked by the 6 Regions, 1 Nebraska effort, which is a statewide governor directed initiative to try to assist with whatever the priorities are that task force put together. And the 2 things that our task force in western Nebraska determined are the priorities was housing and workforce. And so PAD was the recipient of a $200,000 grant to try to create a panhandle-wide assessment and inventory of housing. And this is strictly residential housing. It really, it may include a few apartments that are above commercial buildings, but for the most part, it's either multi-apartment buildings or single-family dwellings. So they are going to contract with JEO Engineering out of Scotts Bluff to try to create what they referred to or described to us anyway as an interactive map. You ought to be able to click on it and see if a particular piece of ground in the city of Chadron is available to build a house on. It's a huge ask, and this would be for all of the incorporated municipalities in the it's in the Western Nebraska Community College region, which I think is the 11 panhandles and maybe 1 or 2 other counties. And they're looking to have something done pretty quickly. They will have this map available, and it'll come on board online, I suppose, in stages, which communities can help them get the information uploaded first. But at the end of the day, we should have a better opportunity, the hope anyway, is that we could market that to a housing developer who would be willing to build houses 20 miles apart and be able to gather enough economy of scale, enough houses for it to make sense for them to come out and do projects in western Nebraska. So that was, I thought, was an interesting direction for PAD to go, which I hope is will yield a good usable product for us. It continues to be an issue every time I talk to folks about business retention, business expansion, business recruitment. A lot of it hinges on whether or not there are places for people to live when they get here, which was really highlighted with the conversation I had with the new hospital administrator. They are still in a situation where housing makes it difficult for them to recruit some of the specialties that they need. So that was an interesting conversation in Scottsbluff, as well as followed up with the guy from the hospital. Then the other thing I just wanted to mention is I put in my report, the Heartland Expressway Association has submitted an application to Congressman Smith's office for what they refer to as community project funding. You and I know it as earmarked funding. His office was encouraging to us when we were out there in March, the end of March, to maybe take a look at an application to them for projects along the Heartland Expressway. And since we had already directed some money requests through Senator Fisher's office for the Chadron North piece of it, we put together an application to maybe study what might be needed on the 71 south of Kimball piece of the highway, partly because it's a two-lane, narrow, difficult road to drive, but mostly because of the doubling the capacity and the expansion at Clean Harbors, which is just south of Kimball. We've been trying to convince DOT that they need to fix the turnoff to the Clean Harbors facility, but their traffic studies did not reveal enough additional traffic to warrant what their numbers need to be to put in a turn lane. So we wanted them to submit an application for us to study that. So we prepared all that, had it ready to go, and then we got a call from DOT that said, you know, we don't want to be accused or to be pointed out. Accused is the wrong word. We don't want to be have people think that we're spending tax dollars to help a private industry. They are not allowed to do that. The numbers would have to show from a safety perspective or some other reason why that turnoff needed to be improved. And so the study numbers that they've already completed, we're not going to get to that point. And so what they recommended we do is ask Kimball County to ask for the funds to fix the highway, and then contract back with the Department of Transportation to actually do the work. So that's what we're attempting to do at this point. So within about 24 hours notice, it went from a planning document to a construction project. And so letters of support had to be rewritten and wording had to be changed, and approvals through Kimball County and DOT. And I think we have all of the pieces in place. The final piece will be tomorrow morning. The Kimball County Commissioners meet, and they have to officially vote to say, yes, we would accept the money if it's awarded, with the intention of contracting. Yes, they're essentially a pass-through to have DOT do the work. Because, as it turns out, DOT already has plans, published plans, to resurface 71 from Kimball to the Colorado border. So we can add this to that scope that's already been published, and it would just become part of an existing project, which is, in transportation lingo, what you have to get the federal funding. So we're hopeful that that will meet with the Congressman's favor. This is by no means a promise that A, he will select it as one of the projects that he gets to put forward, or B, there will be any money available from Congress by the time this is all said and done. Because it also has to then go through the appropriations process and be part of a budget bill for 2026. So it's just one of those things that you just literally have to kind of drop what you're doing and see if you can take advantage of a very short time window to make this work. All said and done, everyone agrees, DOT included, this would be one of the best things we could possibly do for traffic congestion south of Kimball and for safety of the people who work there, safety of the truck drivers, safety of the people coming from the other direction. The other thing is they not only take things to that plant, but the items in that plant that are not able to be burned, that they can't completely eviscerate when they put it in their burner, gets hauled to Colorado and buried in a landfill. So there's additional truck traffic, more truck traffic heading south into Colorado. So, and the final thing I'll mention is there are efforts on the Colorado side as well, which is also very encouraging to us. First time since I've been involved with this that Colorado's willing to go to the feds for money to improve the route to connect to Nebraska. So that's in the works as well. Congresswoman Boebert now represents that district on the very eastern edge of Colorado, and we hope that there may be some improvements on 71 north of Brush, Colorado, up to and to the border of Nebraska 71. It's interesting because it's Nebraska 71, but it's also Colorado 71. It's the same numbered highway on either side of the state line. So that's what we've been busy with the last week or so. And I will hopefully be able to provide any information the Kimball County Commissioners need tomorrow morning. I'll be just via phone at their meeting. And that's the last piece of the puzzle, and then it's off to the Congressman's office. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions or anything you might have gathered from the report that you need.
You mentioned this NPPD webinar about keeping up with power demand.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes.
Are they concerned about that, or do they feel like they are keeping up with demand?
They're very concerned. Because what used to be a huge project was a 1 megawatt project. Now they're coming in asking for 20 megawatts. And almost exclusively it's crypto mining, data centers, those racks and racks and racks of computers. It's so important to the extent that if someone comes to a developer, an economic developer like me or anywhere else in the state, and says, we want to build a plant in Chadron that would need this much water, this much power, this much, it really isn't even so dependent on number of employees anymore. It's, do you have the capacity in all the other inputs, whether it's water or, but power is one of those things that you can't just flip a switch and have more power. We are at a point in Nebraska where they have to be looking at additional generation. Mm-hmm. The one thing that's probably going to continue to evolve is how much of the previous coal-fired plants will come back online. The administration has lessened the regulation on burning coal. And so some of that might happen, but that equipment is old enough now that who knows if that's going to be the answer to the power needs or not. Ultimately, they will need to expand generation.
Deb, in your remarks, you mentioned the problem of money and what's Congress going to do. I don't know how many, hopefully it's accurate. In the April 3rd edition of the Chadron Records is the title, State Lost $100 million in federal earmarks under stopgap funding bill. And it included mentioning one thing that went away was in $5 million for Chadron going north to South Dakota state line. And then it mentioned a number of fire departments and things, and it didn't mention Chadron's, but they didn't
That was
mention
the previous
every.
year. That money was secured the previous calendar or fiscal year. What we've been told, And that's why I say this entire thing is subject to, whatever the administration decides to do tomorrow. But in Senator Fisher's office, the end of March, we were told everything that kind of fell by the wayside that the Chadron record was pointing to, from her perspective, from her office, would be rolled over and asked for this current year, for this coming year, I should say. Whether or not she would entertain additional requests above and beyond what didn't get funded this year, I don't know. But we were assured that the $5 million request that came directly from DOT to Senator Fisher would be included in her list of asks coming up. We should know from Congressman Smith's office if this made the cut, if you will. They are required to publish those on their websites at a certain time. Sometime in mid-June, Congressman Smith has to publish every single one of the projects that he is proposing. And we'll be notified before those go live on the website if ours will be included. Yeah, it's really difficult for any agency that's dependent on federal funding right now, whether it's earmarks or not. There are a lot of jobs in this community that could go away if the president's budget cuts are implemented. Everything from Head Start to community, college programs, Forest Service, lots of cuts.
Any other questions for Deb? Not, thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Okay, fun part of the evening, audit.
I don't believe that part.
What's hoorah?
Good evening. So I'm going to go through the audit report. That'll be the bound report that you guys have in front of you. I'm not going to go through all of it. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have already read it a couple times and have your questions all flagged. So when we get to those pages, just go ahead and ask them. So I'm going to start on page 2. This is the independent auditor's report. Underneath the opinion section, we had an unmodified opinion. Means everything was presented fairly, no material misstatements, type of opinion that we want to have every year, obviously. Going to jump back to the bottom of page 11. There we have a list of some of the major capital asset additions for the year. Didn't spend a lot on capital outlay this year. We did have a few things that cost some pretty decent money. A police Dodge Durango for about $64,000. HVAC unit at the Aquatic Center for about $39,000. Some airport snow removal equipment, $54,000. $67,000 on the airport fence. $45,000 for a pickup for the Parks Department. $26,000 on a mower. $132,000 on the 6th and Mirror Street intersection, and about $48,000 on the East Tank recoating improvements. Bottom of page 12 has a table for the city's outstanding debt at September 30th of 24. The city just had over $4.2 million of debt compared to about $5.2 million a year before. So the debt decreased by about $951,000 or 18%. Gonna jump to page 14. This gets into actual financial statements for the city. So this is basically the balance sheet for the city as a whole. Everything's gonna be reported on the accrual basis, so we have all the cash, receivables, capital assets, all the liabilities gonna be reported. The first column, the governmental activities, includes the general, street, capital projects, debt service, aquatic center, economic development, and then a few other non-major funds. They had total assets of about $27.8 million. And about $3.7 million of total liabilities, so total net position or equity of just over $24 million. The business type activities, the second column, include the water and street funds. They had total assets of just under $8.6 million, about $1.4 million of total liabilities. Total net position or equity was $7,146,000. And then the column on the right, the component units, and that includes the CDA and the Library Foundation. They combined had about a total of $1 million of assets, 529,000 of liabilities, so 470,000 of net position. Page 15 shows the revenue and expenses for the different activities. Third line from the bottom on the right side shows the change in net position. This is basically the net income or the loss for the year. The government activities increased 43,000. Business type activities had a decrease of $287. That's about as close to breaking even as I've ever seen on one of these. And the component units increased about 45,000.
Could you, under the general revenues, we have a miscellaneous of a negative $283,000.
So
Any idea, what is that?
that is going to be the internal service fund gets reported as part of the governmental activities. And this basically, we don't show its revenue and expenses separate. We basically just net its operating income in one line and add it to the miscellaneous. So the internal service fund had a loss from operations of what, 367,000. So that's what creates that loss in that miscellaneous in the governmental.
We have a couple new council members, and I don't know if they've been internal service fund. Do you know what that is? That's our self-insured health plan, where we pick up a number of costs before it goes to the insurance for drastic instances or catastrophic instances.
Yes, like you said, on that, we had about 400,000 of total revenue, 775,000 of benefits that we paid out. So that created a $367,000 loss. So when we net that loss with the actual miscellaneous income from the government activities, had a $282,000 deficit. Page 16 is the balance sheet for the individual governmental funds. We're still on the accrual basis here, but we don't have any capital assets or long-term debt. It's just going to be the current assets and liabilities. So we show a column for general street, capital projects, economic development, debt service, and the aquatic center. And then the other governmental funds include the community development, Keno, infrastructure improvement, transportation grant, and the grants. So going back to the first column, the general had total assets of just under 4.6 million. About 3.9 million of that was in cash reserves. 465,000 of liabilities. We had total fund balance or equity of just over 4.1 million. Street fund had $1,051,000 of assets, just under $1 million.
Before you go on, budgetary stabilization.
So
What
the
is
budget
that?
that you adopted for 9/3 of '25 was going to spend down your cash reserves in the general fund by 881,000. So that fund balance shows as assigned because we've already said we're going to spend that money. So instead of showing it as unassigned, we show that as assigned. Does that make sense? Street fund had total assets of $1,051,000. Only 27,000 of liabilities, so just over $1 million of fund balance. Capital projects had 192,000 of assets. That's all cash, no liabilities there. The economic development fund had 613,000 of total assets. 484,000 of that was cash, no liabilities. Debt service fund had 853,000 of total assets, about 771,000 of cash. Only about $1,800 of liabilities, so we had 851,000 of fund balance. The aquatic center had 859,000 of total assets, 757,000 of that was cash. $3,300 of liabilities, so we had 856,000 of fund balance. And then those other funds had 481,000 of total assets, $9,500 of liabilities, so 471,000 of fund balance. In that, we have about 139,000 that's restricted for community development, 65,000 restricted for community betterment, 10,000 restricted for transportation, and then 142,000 that was restricted for projects. and then additional 110,000 that was assigned for capital outlay. Page 18 shows the revenue and expenses for the governmental funds. The third line from the bottom will show the change in fund balance. Again, this is basically the net income or the loss for the year. The general fund increased to 139,000. Street fund increased 51,000. Capital projects was increased 40,000. Economic development increased 25,000. Debt service increased 152,000. The aquatic center increased 208,000, and those other funds increased $1,800. So across the board, we did increase fund balance in all the funds and had some pretty good growth in some of those. Page 20 is the balance sheet for the proprietary funds. So we have the two enterprise funds, the water and wastewater, and we have a total for them, and then the far right column will be that internal service fund. Again, these are on the accrual basis, but we do have all the capital assets and long-term liabilities will be reported under these. A lot of different reporting models and financial statements for cities. The water fund had total assets about 4.2 million. Of that, 783,000 was cash, 248,000 of liabilities, so 3.9 million of net position. Wastewater fund had just under 4.4 million of total assets. About 2.1 million of that was in cash. Or not, yeah, 2.1 million in cash. Just under 1.2 million of liabilities, so total net position was 3,183,000. And then the internal service fund had total assets of 607,000, 106,000 of liabilities, so I had about 500,000 of equity. Page 21 is the statement of revenues and expenses for those funds. Third line from the bottom, the water fund increased 83,000. Wastewater decreased 83,000, and the internal service fund decreased 347,000. Page 22 is the statement of cash flows for the proprietary funds. We're about halfway down. It's indented, shows the increase and decrease in cash and cash equivalents. Water fund cash increased 149,000. Wastewater fund increased just about 50,000, and then the internal service fund decreased 50,000. I think that's all I'll cover out of the bound report. I will point out, I suppose, if you haven't looked at all of it, on page 64 and 65, we do have more detail for those non-major governmental funds. We have a column for each of those. And then behind that, on page 66, we have the detail for the general fund departments. We have the revenue expenses by department.
For the non-accountant, I'd really recommend that they look at this section kind of as a really easier to understand documents about what we budget and what we spend.
Any questions on any of that?
I just had one quick question. In this document, it just, corrected,
Okay.
corrected misstatements.
Yeah, okay.
Or you haven't gotten to that yet?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So, any questions on the bound report? Okay, so if there's no questions on that, we'll go to the two letters that Mark was talking about. So there's a two-page one, basically says we don't have segregation of duties. We're never gonna get rid of that comment. We do 80 to 85 audits for cities and villages across the state. City of Hastings might be the only one that doesn't have that comment. It's just not feasible, especially in a city your size, to have the appropriate number of accounting staff to have true segregation of duties. There's just gonna be a lot that she handles from beginning to end. She does a good job with it. So you guys as a council, mayor, just need to continue being involved with the oversight. Having George, obviously, as the mayor is a huge benefit to the city with his experience. And I think you guys have always done a good job with that. And the council has always done a good job with her questions and all that. So just continue to keep that up. In addition to that, there was a 4-page letter. And that's the one that Mark did just mention. So on page 2 of that is the corrected and uncorrected misstatements. So we did have 31 audit adjustments on the governmental funds. 14 adjustments on the business type funds, or basically the utility funds. And we go through a list of some of the bigger journal entries that we made. Wasn't anything that was just wrong. A lot of it was just adjusting a lot of the accrual items, because you guys are on the accrual basis. A lot of times the books get kept on the cash basis, and those accruals just don't get updated at the end of the year, so we had to do a lot of those adjustments. In the past, we haven't done those. We're doing more and more of those each year for you. What was your question on that?
It was just really, it had to do with the word trivial. If there's a threshold, dollar threshold, it just says that, you know, these are the 31 things that weren't trivial. I just didn't know what.
Yeah, so the adjustments that we list here would be the significant adjustments. The rest of them are gonna be when we consider trivial. Anything that trivial is gonna be like $1,000 or less. So these are just gonna be the bigger ones, and there's just a lot of just smaller ones that basically were just trivial. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I just didn't know.
Okay.
That's pretty subjective. I didn't know if there was a threshold, but 1,000.
Yeah, so there is a calculation we go through on the materiality, and we have the individually significant items, and those are kind of are what are listed here. Anything below that are gonna be the smaller journal entries.
So, Michael, on item number 4, accounts payable, and I know I did it when I audited the city. I found the accounts payable and we adjusted them. Do you do any cities, you know, where the staff internally adjusts?
Where they do the accounts payable?
Yeah, it records everything, and
We have a couple that do it.
do they?
Yeah. And that's the one that one normally is one that we do, but we do have a couple that do it. And then in the past, the city of Chadron, and all the years that I've been doing the audit, have done it. This was the first year that it wasn't done. Otherwise, in the past, you guys had always done that.
Okay. I was quite intrigued, and you can relate to this, at the one seminar, or the governmental accounting and auditing seminar, you had the presentation, I'm sure you were there, from this firm in Oklahoma that got out of the auditing business and went into the business of preparing the financial statements for the municipalities for the auditor. Since I quit going to that, have you seen a lot of people doing that, or a lot of firms doing that?
I know exactly who you're talking about. It's Frank Crawford out of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And he's been big on that the auditor should not be the one preparing the financial statements. I think he's kind of extreme on that view. Pretty much all the auditors prepare the financial statements. You guys as a city just has to have someone who can accept responsibility for those financial statements. And that's gonna be your finance director. Obviously with you being the
I know
mayor,
the year after
oversight.
I quit auditing, and I had a staff person, we did come down to the city and do a lot of the preliminary work for then Falco for that first year, and I think that was fine that year, and then Falco did it the next year, and then they got out of the auditing the city.
Yeah, we just don't see anybody really doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much all we see is the auditors are the ones preparing the financial statements, because it's just not really cost effective to have two people
Yeah.
involved in that. So on the third page of that 4-page letter, we do have our other audit findings and issues. This is where we just, anything we came across in the audit, we have a recommendation or a finding on some of this stuff. So number 1, the pool checking account, we had several checks. In the payroll checking account, had 2 checks. They have been outstanding for more than a year. We just recommend reviewing those checks. If they need to be voided and reissued, we need to do that, or in this case, maybe we just need to write those off. But we should try and get that cleaned up.
So do you have recommendations about writing off old things, and do we have to go through send it to the state treasurer and
That's up to you if you want to go that far. A lot of them are probably just probably just duplicates. If it's something that we actually think we can track them down, we need to do that. I don't really see a lot of them that turn them over as unclaimed property. But number two, we've had this in here for last several years. The LB 840 note receivable with business connections, they're in default. They've made minimal payments since February of 20. We just recommend just working to try and collect anything we can on that. Number three, in the miscellaneous account receivable, about 95% of it was more than 120 days old. We just recommend having processes to monitor that and try and get those things collected, or if we need to, just cleaning up those receivables. Number four is kind of a small, and there's one receipt on the transportation credit card that we couldn't find. Those all should be maintained and kept with the credit card statement. Number five, the accounts payable wasn't recorded at the end of the year. We normally don't have this comment in there just because the city of Chadron has in the past always recorded those accounts payable, and this year they just didn't get to it. So we did put that comment in there. And then there's number six, the city has that 2.5% fee on credit card and debit card transactions. When we were here in January, we had implemented the fee, but we actually hadn't started charging it at the aquatic center. We just hadn't figured out how to get that, and everyone was aware of that they were working on that. So that's kind of all the findings and recommendations that we had on that. Any questions on any of those? The last thing I'll go over is the little 2-page benchmarking that I handed out prior to the meeting. So we have a couple new council members. So a little bit about our firm. Like I said earlier, we do about 80 to 85 audits for cities and villages across the state. We're by far the largest municipal auditor in the state. So what we do, since we have all that data, is we basically split it up in different population groups and then compare you to different cities your size. So you're going to be in the 3,000 to 10,000 population or peer group. The average population in that group is going to be 5,435. Your population is 5,206, so we're kind of right in the middle of that. Second line, the valuation. The average valuation for cities in that group is going to be $448 million. On a per capita basis, it's 82,000, or per person in town is 82,000. Your guys' valuation was $321 million. On a per capita basis, we're at 61,000. So our valuation is going to be on the low side of this peer group.
Don't you dare mention that to the assessor. My valuations are high enough already.
So
Makes two of ours.
number one, the unrestricted net position versus total net position basically tells us how much of the city's resources are available for some normal day-to-day operations and programs. So the government-wide or the city as a whole, we recommend 35%. In 2024, we were at 23.1%. In 23, we're at 22.8%. We've always been pretty consistent in those lower 20s. Doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have good cash reserves, because we actually do. The city just has a lot of restricted cash. When we look at some of those different funds, we just have a lot of, like the debt service, aquatic center, we just have a lot of restricted cash. So that kind of just pushes this number down. So even though we're on the low side, we're actually in pretty good shape. I'm not actually concerned about any of that. For the governmental activities, basically general street, the debt service, economic development, the tax supported funds, we recommend 25%. You're at 17.7, down from 18.8% a year ago. And it's the same reason, just we have a lot of restricted cash. For the business type activities or the utility funds, we recommend 40%. You're just over that at 41.2%, up from 36% a year ago. We've actually had some increases each of the 5 years that we show on here. So we do show you the 4 prior years, just so we have some history on all this. You can see some trends. Number 2, the top 3 sources of revenue for just the governmental activities. Your biggest source of revenue is going to be the sales tax. The typical city your size gets $428 per capita. We're at $455, down just a little bit from $459. We've been really consistent on our sales tax revenue the last 4 years. You go back to 2020, we were at $350 per capita, and then we went up to $465. Obviously, with COVID, people started shopping online more, and then with that, that's when they actually put in the sales tax on online purchases, went into effect. So that's why we saw those increases in 21 from 20. State allocations, or the second one there on number 2 is the property taxes. So the typical city year size is $257 per capita. We're just below that at $253, $248 a year ago. State allocation, the average is $196 per capita. You were at $233 from $223 a year ago. Number 3 gets in the detail for those state allocations. So the biggest two, highway allocation, where the street funding, the average city your size gets $147 per capita. We're just a little bit on the low side at $131 from $126 a year ago. Then the equalization is basically state aid to kind of equalize property taxes. It is based on a formula of population, valuation, and then your property tax levy. So because our valuation is going to be low for, we talked about there, we're about 75% of the average valuation for cities your size. We do qualify for more aid. So the typical city your size gets $49 per capita. We do get $92 this year from $87 a year ago. Number 4 looks at the governmental spending. This excludes capital outlay, so it's just going to be the operating expenses. The admin, the average is $90 per capita. We're at $129 this year from $124 a year ago, $126 in 2022. So we've been really consistent the last 3 years. Police, the average is $225. This year we're at $279. A year ago we were at $248, $233 in 22. Police costs have just been on the rise the last couple of years. It's really hard to find officers. There's a lot more training. You just have to pay them more. This is a statewide trend that we're seeing higher costs in the police department. Fire, the average is $70 per capita. We're well below that at 17. Communications, the average is 70. We're at 96, up from $85 a year ago. Transit, the average is $10. We're at 35. Airport, the average is 30. We're at 126. Your airport does get a lot more traffic than most airports for cities your size. So even though we have higher costs, we're also going to have higher fuel sales to offset that. Library, the average is $60 per capita. We're at 71. Ambulance, the average is 15. We're at 10. Parks and Cemetery, the average is 60. We're at 69. And then swimming pool, the average is 30. We're at 73. Really, when you look back at the 5 years that we show, all of the costs are pretty consistent with what they've been in the prior years. Just have your inflationary increases on most of those. Number 5, the outstanding geo debt compared to valuation basically tells if the city has too much debt compared to its valuation. So anything below 3% is going to be excellent. We're at 0.96%, so we're in that excellent category. The city really doesn't have very much debt at all. Number 6, unassigned fund balance compared to general fund expenditures. Basically tells us how much of the general fund resources are available for just the normal day-to-day operations in the programs. So we recommend 30%. You guys are at 47.2 this year, down from 63.9% a year ago. So quite a decrease from a year ago, just because our general fund cash did, or our unassigned general fund cash did decrease, but we're still well above what we would recommend on that. Number 7, the street cash reserve. We recommend having 12 months of operating expenses reserved for the street fund. This year we're at 13.8, down from 14.6% a year ago. We do have good street cash reserves. Number 8 looks at the property tax levies. The typical city your size has a 35-cent general levy plus a 6-cent debt service levy, so a total of 41 cents. City of Chadron had a 39.6 general levy, no debt service levy. So when you look at the total, our total levy is going to be about 1.5 cents below the typical city our size. If you look back on that general levy, going back to 2020, we were at 42.25. So as our valuation has been increasing the last couple of years, we really haven't been changing or raising our tax requests to keep up with that valuation. So our levy has been decreasing. And then the debt service levy dropped off this year. We had been asking for about 1.5 cents, and then that ended this year. Number 9, the net depreciable capital assets compared to original cost. basically tells us how old the equipment infrastructure is. So the lower these percentages get, the more important it is that we have cash reserves to maintain those assets, because we're gonna have more repairs on them, and then cash to potentially replace those assets. So we recommend staying over 35%. This year, the government activities are at 51.3%, and the business type we're at 35.02. We won't actually have any cash reserves recommended for the governmental, but we will have some on that business type activities when we get to those cash reserves. Number 10 looks at the utility rates. So when we compare the net operating income or loss compared to the total operating revenue or the total utility charges, we recommend a 15% return to generate cash for operations, equipment replacement, debt service. This year, the water fund was at 5.9%, up from 5.4 a year ago. Go back to 22, we were at 4.3, 21 was 2.2. So we're still well below what we'd recommend. We have seen a little bit of improvement each of the last few years. The water fund still has good cash reserves. It's still cash flowing, so I wouldn't recommend any rate increases on the water fund. The wastewater fund, again, we recommend a 15% return. This year was a negative 13.6. 23 was 0.8%. 22 was negative 10%. 21 was negative 4%. So it's been negative in 4 of the 5 years, and the 1 year it was positive was less than 1%. We're basically not collecting enough revenue to replace the depreciation that we're charging off. So you're not building up cash to replace assets. It's still cash flowing. For a sewer fund, it has, like I mentioned earlier, it has over $2 million in cash reserves. That's outstanding cash reserves for the sewer fund. We're still cash flowing, adding to those reserves. So I wouldn't recommend increasing those rates, but just keep an eye on those that make sure that we do continue to cash flow and we can maintain those reserves. Number 11, the debt coverage ratio basically tells us if the rates are set high enough to actually service our debt. So we recommend 1.5. This year, the wastewater was 1.11, down from 1.9 a year ago. Basically means our rates aren't set high enough to service the debt. When we look at the cash flow, we actually are generating enough cash to service that debt. And your debt in that fund is going to drop off here in about 5 years or so, I think. So just keep an eye on those water and wastewater rates. Make sure that we don't start really just losing cash from operations. As long as it's generating cash, I'm fine with the rates on where they're set. The last one, number 12, looks at the cash reserves. So the first one there, the general fund, we recommend just under 2.3 million of total cash reserves. You guys have 2.2 million this year, 2.9 million a year ago. We have more cash than that 2.2 million, but we have 881,000 that we had assigned for that budget stabilization, and we'd already budgeted to spend that down, so we basically take that out. If you add that back in, we'd have more than what we would recommend for cash reserves. And right now, you're 100,000 below. So we do have good cash reserves in that general fund. Just want to make sure that we can maintain those. And obviously, if we spend down that general fund cash by the 880,000 this year, we don't want to do that too many more years, because then you're not going to have much cash in that general fund at all. So just keep an eye on that. And then for the business type activities, we recommend 840,000 for operations, 400,000 for restricted in that sewer fund for the debt service, and then the equipment replacement of about 2.1 million. That's based on our calculation from number 9 above. So total cash reserves of 3,350,000 is what we recommend. You guys had 2.9 million this year, up from 2.7 a year ago. Go all the way back to 2020, we were at 1.8 million. So we've seen quite a bit of growth in our cash reserves in these utility funds. We're below what we'd recommend, but that's just because we have $2 million recommended for replacement. When we look at just those operations and unrestricted, we do have tremendous cash reserves in that water and wastewater fund. Overall, the audit went pretty smooth. It's just more each year, there's just more and more stuff going on, and we have to do more and more journal entries just because Michelle doesn't have time to get to all of it. Across the board, we do have good cash reserves. Looks like the utility rates are set pretty good, so I think we're doing a pretty good job up here.
I'd like to back up to number 4, the transit. If you notice, that increased those, your kind of average or whatever is $10 per capita, and we're doing
30.
35, and it was 30